Action. Welcome to episode 2 of the RNL show, Revolution, Nothing Less. Nothing less than revolution, an actual revolution, can cure all that plagues humanity today and bring about a far better world that can emancipate humanity here and around the world. This is a show based on the new communism developed by Bob Avakian. My name is Andy Zee. I'm your host of the RNL show, Revolution, Nothing Less.
And my name is Sansara Taylor. I'm a writer for RevCom.us. I'm a co-host of the show, and we're all so happy to be back for episode 2.
And I'm Luan. I'm with the Revolution Club, and I'm glad to be here. And I want to let people know we got our hand sanitizer on lock. Got the face masks that everybody should be getting. We got to wear them outside, as we learned in the first episode of the show, and we're keeping our distance. So glad to be here with y'all, and let's get started.
Luan's right. This is we are in a situation where the COVID-19, the coronavirus, is intensifying. It's reached horrific proportions in the New York area that's spreading across the country, Detroit, Chicago, and here in Los Angeles. This is an extremely serious situation. We spoke to it last week, and we're going to get into some other things today. But first I have to say that what's made it so bad is all the pre-existing conditions. Now, I'm not just talking about the pre-existing conditions of respiratory disease. I'm talking about the pre-existing conditions of this capitalist imperialist system and the fascist government that rules it. The pre-existing conditions of the oppression of black and brown people, huddled, jammed up in housing projects, in prisons, in detention camps on the border. The pre-existing condition of the oppression of women, where this fascist regime is trying to take advantage of a situation and use this to deny women the right to abortion in several states. It's really pending right now. The pre-existing condition of what imperialism does to countries around the world. This disease does not respect national borders, and either does imperialism as it savages and ravages the world. This is a show that's going to get into this and bring to you why an actual revolution is possible, how we could do it, and what that revolution is going to be for. And this is possible today. It's not an impossibility. It's possible today because the conditions exist in the world where we could solve these problems. No, we can't eradicate all disease, but we could be working on disease in a whole other way if not for the fact that this system and its relentless pursuit of profit and competition between countries for this and its wars and environmental devastation could be overcome through a genuine socialist society that comes about as a result of a revolution. And we can make that possible because we have the understanding and the theory to make that possible in the new communism that's been developed by Bob Avakian. That's what we're going to be talking about today. So you can, all of our listeners here and people who are watching this show can find out about what gives us optimism in a time of great plague and how we can go to work on it. This is not Pollyannish, this is a hard road, but it's one we think we can take. So I think before we dig more into that, you had some things to say, Sansara.
Yes, mainly I wanted to let you know what we have in store for you in today's program. We've got 2 big themes. One, both Andy indicated in some dimension. We're going to get into what is an actual revolution, what it means to say we want to overthrow this system. We're going to go into that by looking at some of the excerpts from speeches from the revolutionary leader, Bob Avakian, and then we're going to dig into a key fault line of this system and how it's interpenetrating with this pandemic coronavirus. We're going to look at the conditions of immigrants in this country, what has driven them to this country from around the world. We're going to hear an extraordinary excerpt from a talk that Bob Avakian gave years ago on why people come here in the first place, what has driven them from their homes. And then we're going to have an interview with an immigrant rights activist, Jorge Torres, about the conditions of immigrants today and how the pandemic, COVID-19, is ravaging communities, threatening to turn concentration camps and detention centers into death camps, and the struggle, the righteous struggle that people are waging against this. We're also going to look at some of the work that the Revolution Tour has been doing. We're going to bring you a Communique talking about this crisis and how it's impacting immigrants. So we're going to go at these themes. We're going to take the time together to get into it, and that's our plan for today.
So what makes this show so unique, what gives it its liveliness and engagement, is the fact that we are coming at you with a fundamental change outside the box of this system. And we're coming at you with a scientific approach to understanding the world. Without that, you can't deal with the complexity of fixing all of what I said before that plagues humanity today. You need to be able to understand the world the way it actually is and how different problems interrelate and what problem at any given time is determining things more than another problem. Like right now, when we started this show, we didn't expect there to be a coronavirus that was going to be what we were talking about. But now a lot of the problems that this system are getting concentrated in this particular outbreak of the plague, and how the system is and is mainly not dealing with this in a correct way, even as policies such as shelter in place are correct and necessary at this time. A scientific approach requires a method and approach, and this is at the core of the new communism that Bob Avakian's developed, and we're going to get into that. It's really what gives us our uniqueness and our confidence to say that we can actually go forward and look at these problems and see where are the openings to build struggle that's going to contribute to a movement for an actual revolution, which is why we came to Los Angeles. And we're going to get into that a bit more, but I do want to say just for myself, and I'm sure for everybody else, how much we appreciate the response of the first audience for this show. It really, it was extremely heartening. We know we had some technical problems, but I got to tell you something. This crew is trying to put together a show under the most extreme circumstances and trying to do so in a way that protects not just their own health, but the health of the community at large. And so, hats off to them. But why don't one of you talk a little bit about what we heard back from people? Then let's dive into and let people know what's really animating the show, what we're all about.
Yeah. I'll echo. We were really heartened by the response we got. We want to thank everybody who tuned in. Actually, extra thanks to our first Patreon supporters, patreon.com/therevcoms. All of you who began to be monthly sustainers, and more people should be. You're invited. But we heard from a number of people, young people in different parts of the country, actually. I got to be on a conference call with people who were discussing what they learned. And one of my favorite things to hear was one young woman said, well, before I saw the show, I was thinking masks, they should just be for those who are infected. Maybe coronavirus isn't that serious, but after the show, I was realizing we've been lied to by the mainstream media. They've downplayed the threat, they've downplayed the precautions we should be taking, and all of us, I can't tell you how much all of us like to hear that. Before the show, I thought this, after the show, I thought that, especially when there are things that really matter. And this has to do with bringing people science. And it's going to be at the heart of everything we do, evidence-based. Don't trust us. Listen to the argument, interrogate it, and look at the evidence. That's what we're doing with everything we get into as well. You should have some trust for us, but mainly because we're dealing with the reality. The other thing that I wanted to highlight that we heard from people quite a bit was in a number of different ways, responding to the excerpt from Avakian that we showed, also responding to the 5 things we would do better under a socialist society with state power, dealing with a pandemic, was a number of people told us this helped them get outside the constraints of today and see that the world does not have to stay this way, and actually imagine how we could take the resources, the understanding, and the impulse to help each other and unleash it and give it backing and actually go to work on problems that today seem impossible to even imagine beyond. So this is, like I said, it's just our first episode, but it was very heartening, and it gives a little window into some of the impact we are having and more that we want to have.
I want to echo what you said, and let's go pull the lens back and really get into what is the big problem that we're trying to solve.
So I want to speak to that some, because the reality is, one, the world doesn't have to be this way. And there is a whole new understanding of how we can organize society that's been brought forward by this leader, Bob Avakian. And it's called the new communism. And we want to put this on the map. Like, we came here to LA because so many people have no idea that this is out there, and no idea that someone has gone to work on how we can solve some of the biggest problems confronting humanity. And this is something that's not known. We're out to change the situation. We're out to put this on the map and bring people together, and building this movement for a real revolution. Not just on the ground, but on the ground, in the real world, and online, and that's what you're a part of too with this. And part of what we're trying to do here is actually break off that crust. Like, so many people think, oh, this is the only way the world could ever be, and that's bullshit. And now we're getting a sense of just how much the world could change, even with this pandemic that's happening, how so many people's lives have been really turned around, turned up, because this whole system is unsustainable. But we're not talking about how can we just hunker down and survive in this time. We're talking about how we can go forward to something different, how we can actually build a whole other kind of society where people will actually be treated as full human beings, where we can actually go forward to emancipate not just people here, but all humanity. So that's what this show is about, and that's some of why we're doing this in the first place, and we're going to take you along with us as we go forward on this journey.
Yeah, let's really get into what is an actual revolution. The word revolution is thrown around a great deal today. Our revolution, this revolution, that revolution, most of which is not referring to what an actual revolution is. 2 years ago, in 2018, Bob Avakian did a film called Why We Need a Revolution, How We Can Really Make Revolution. And here I just want to take a short clip from that film. We'll get into more of it later. A short clip of what is an actual revolution.
First, let's return to the crucial question of what revolution really means. At the very beginning of How We Can Win, this is made very clear. An actual revolution does not mean trying to make some changes within this system. It means overthrowing this system and bringing into being a radically different and far better system. Radical means getting to the root, digging up the old system by its roots and replacing it with a fundamentally different system. And what opens the way to doing this is shattering the rule of capitalism over society through defeating and dismantling its institutions, such as the police and armed forces, that violently enforce this system's rule, and then bringing into being new institutions that serve the radical transformation of society and ultimately the world as a whole.
So just to go back to some of what we were hearing before when Andy was introducing this, he was making this point about how you hear the word revolution all the time. Like, people say it to mean and talk about all kinds of different things. And this was really helpful in actually speaking to, well, what is an actual revolution? Like, it's not a new car, it's not a new this, it's not a new that. It's speaking to dismantling, overthrowing, getting rid of this whole system and what that actually means. And you think about, like, a lot of the times when you hear people talking about the word revolution, they're speaking to a big change that's going on. And they talk about every other thing but how to actually change things, you know? How to actually change, how to get to a different kind of situation. And you hear this, like, very clearly coming from BA in this talk, like, about what it actually means to make revolution, what it actually means for people to be coming together to make this kind of change happen. And I think it's just really helpful and clear to get a sense of, well, what will it actually take, you know, to get to a whole different kind of world. And there's more to be said, like, if you want to say some more on that.
Well, you know, I think there's a lot of reasons people shy away from that. In addition to that, it's actually a very hard road. But part of it, there's not been a strategy to actually win a revolution until Bob Avakian went and did this work and actually developed a strategy for it. You know, he references in this clip that we just saw, the pamphlet, How We Can Win, How We Can Really Make Revolution. That gets into why we need the actual revolution. He cites that, what we need to do now, and how we could actually defeat them. That's a big deal, and it merits some study. You know, people should watch the film that this comes from, Why We Need a Revolution, and how we could really make revolution. But the fact is, we really could make a revolution, and in fact, we're making a revolution now with this show, with the work of the tour. It's one process. We can't right now go launch a revolution that the conditions don't present in society, including one of the conditions is having a force of masses of people in their millions ready to make a revolution. So, you know, I think this is something that people really need to get into. It's incredible to think that there's actually something developed a way to actually do this. And I just want to say this short 1-minute segment follows a very sharp exposition of the things that cannot be reformed under this system. And we call the 5 stops, 5 key aspects of this that can't be reformed, but that because they can't be reformed and millions of people care about them, the oppression of black people, the environment, the danger of war, the oppression of women, LGBTQ people, the immigrants, because people care deeply about this, there's a basis for that. Plus there's the technology and the knowledge and the productive capacity in the world as a whole that could actually bring this revolution into being. But if there's no strategy, then it's just a good idea. Now it's not just a good idea, it's a reality. That's what BA brings. That's why we make a big deal out of them, among other things, in terms of the method approach as well as the vision of a new society. But this is really important, that there is a strategy, a way to make an actual revolution.
Yeah, I think it's really important. It's true, you can't go out and launch a revolution right now. The conditions don't present, we don't have a revolutionary people in their millions. But the point about we have a strategy, and we're working on that with this show and with the Revolution Tour. We're not sitting back waiting. That's a big thing BA has pointed out. You don't sit back and wait for conditions to ripen, you work on those conditions. And one of the big ways right now is it's in very challenging conditions of this Corona pandemic, but we have continued, and the Revolution Tour that we're part of has continued to find the ways to go out to the masses of people with this message and to bring them into this and to take up a fight around one of the 5 stops you're mentioning, the oppression and terror that is heaped down on immigrants and the way these things come together. So I want to introduce right now and share with you a communique that the Revolution Tour has been taking out all across Los Angeles and especially among the oppressed. And we've been spreading in other parts of the country as well. And then we'll come back at the back end and we'll talk about it some.
Communique number 3 from the RevComs. The coronavirus and the attacks on immigrants. We need a revolution. Centuries ago, the Europeans who first invaded this continent brought with them diseases like smallpox. The Europeans had built up immunity to these diseases over centuries, and this meant that while epidemics would occur and kill many people, many would also survive. But those who lived here, the Native American Indians, had not yet encountered these viruses. And as a result, as many as 9 out of 10 of them died as soon as they came into contact with these Europeans. The invaders claimed that this was proof that God was on their side. This genocide, along with the enslavement and centuries-long exploitation and oppression of African Americans, was one of the founding crimes of America. Today, the U.S. government is following in the footsteps of their forefathers. They are taking actions that will make the impact of a disease much more deadly against the people that they want out of the way. The disease is the novel coronavirus. The people are those immigrants who have committed the crime of coming to this country seeking safe haven from political persecution or economic immiseration. In a bitter irony, many of those being attacked are the descendants of the native peoples who did survive the guns and germs of the European invaders. ICE, the immigration police, has been rounding people up for months, arresting fathers as they take their daughters to school, beating and tasing bystanders who ask what is going on, raiding workplaces with SWAT teams, and on and on. They are running the streets of immigrant neighborhoods as if they were Hitler's Gestapo, neighborhoods in which people are already terrorized by the fear of deportation, already exploited in rotten jobs with worse pay, no health insurance, and unhealthy housing, already demonized and threatened by MAGA fascists whenever they show their face where they shouldn't be. Then, ICE locks the people they snatch into detention centers where the conditions are inhumane and diseases are left to breed. 40,000 people are kept in these pens, Now, with the coronavirus making things worse, over 3,000 medical professionals released a letter last week demanding the release of individuals and families from these hellholes. After first saying that they would seek alternatives to detention, ICE then reneged, saying it would continue to prioritize arresting and removing criminal aliens and other aliens who pose a threat to public safety, just as it always has during the President Donald Trump's administration. This pandemic has not stopped Trump from hounding, harassing, and now sentencing the immigrants to death through the use of ICE. It must not stop us from standing with the immigrants to stop this. This persecution is outrageous and completely unnecessary. The Constitution for the New Socialist Republic in North America, authored by Bob Avakian, takes this stand. The orientation of the New Socialist Republic in North America is to welcome immigrants from all over the world who have a sincere desire to contribute to the goals and objectives of this republic as set forth in this Constitution and in laws and policies which are established and enacted in accordance with this Constitution. The world that is outlined in this Constitution is possible, but it will take a revolution, nothing less. And we have the science, strategy, and leadership in Bob Avakian for this revolution. What's missing is you. A first step, spread the word about this. Repost this communique and let us know what's happening.
So if you want to know why we need a revolution, why we want state power, is we could do all of this so radically differently. And this is what we're fighting for now. This communique, you should take it very seriously. The crimes from the founding of this country to today, and the mission we're on and inviting you to be part of. Like he said, take this communique, find it at revcom.us, spread it where you are, get it to the people you know. This is a mission we have to be on together.
Yeah. So I think just to get deeper into, what we have to make this revolution and what it is that we are working to bring forward, I want to go back to that first part of the film, why we need a revolution, how we could really make a revolution. Right after, or soon after that part we watched before about what an actual revolution is, Bob Avakian goes into what is the revolutionary legacy of the 1960s, what came out of that, what lesson came out of that, and what we have today, and what we need to bring forward, and why we're here in LA, and why we're putting on this show, why we need an actual revolution, and how we could really make a revolution. So let's roll that clip.
This year is the 50th anniversary of 1968. Even the representatives and advocates of this system cannot simply ignore the significance of that year and the very positive upheaval, rebellion, militant defiance, and radicalization that characterized it and that period overall. However, as can be seen, for example, in the CNN series 1968, they are once again trying to force all this into the framework of ruling class interests and ruling class politics, and in particular, the presidential election of that year. And there are progressives who insist that the left made a terrible mistake in 1968 by not supporting the Democratic candidate for president, Hubert Humphrey, which they say allowed Richard Nixon to win the election and gave support and impetus to the right wing in its backlash against the progressive movements and gains of the 1960s. What is revealed in this critique is the utter inability or the refusal of such progressives to see and think beyond the confines of capitalist relations and capitalist rule, even in attempting to analyze the kind of situation that existed in 1968 when great numbers of people were precisely challenging and breaking out of those confines. By 1968 and for several years after, there were large numbers of people in this country, including millions of youth from the middle class, as well as masses of poor and oppressed people who were motivated by a thoroughly justified hatred of this system and aspirations for a radically different and better world. And this reached deeply into the system's own armed forces. Even if the understanding of most was marked by revolutionary sentiment, which, while righteous, was lacking in any deep and consistent scientific basis. And the real failure of that time was that there was not yet a revolutionary vanguard with that scientific foundation and method, and the orientation, strategy, and program that could give organized expression to the mass revolutionary sentiment and lead a real attempt at actually making revolution. That is a challenge before us now. And now, particularly because the work that I have done and the leadership I have been providing over the decades since the 1960s, we do have the further development of the scientific method and approach to revolution with the new communism. We have the strategic approach and plan for making this revolution. We have the Constitution for the new socialist republic in North America, a sweeping vision and concrete blueprint for a radically new and emancipating society aiming for the emancipation of humanity as a whole. But let's be straight up. What we do not have yet are masses of people who are won to revolution and driven to work for it, especially youth who are always the driving force of any revolution. And although we have the foundation and scaffolding of revolutionary organization that could be built on and expanded into a vanguard force capable of actually leading the revolution all the way through, we do not yet have the necessary cadre of leadership on all levels and in all parts of the country who have not only the determination, but also the scientific grounding to lead the masses who must be brought forward in making revolution. While some of us who came forward during the 1960s have retained, indeed deepened, our revolutionary passion and the scientific grounding that sustains it, many others have given up on revolution. And although there are literally tens of millions in this country who hate the injustices and indignities that people suffer under this system, and who can be awakened to the possibility of a radically different and better world, as yet far too few have been brought forward into the ranks of the revolution and developed and trained as revolutionary leaders. This is what all those who cannot stand to live another day under this monstrosity of a system and are filled with passionate intensity to bring this system down and bring a radically different world into being, this is what we all need to be actively working toward. Building up the ranks of the revolution, first in the thousands, and then as things develop toward the decisive point, millions, as an organized force, and learning to become leaders of this revolution who can enable those millions to be in a position to fight all out with a real chance to win when the time comes. This is not a revolution for revenge. The goal is not for exploited and oppressed humanity to have a chance to become exploiters and oppressors themselves. It is a communist revolution whose goal is nothing less than putting an end to all relations of exploitation and oppression, and all the degradation and destruction bound up with this throughout the world.
I think people should take that in for a second and actually listen to that. Something that's really striking me off of listening to this again is that, look, we don't actually have forever. You know, this isn't just a never-ending timeline that we're living on. There's real consequences that are happening to the world. You think about even last year, millions of youth all over the world going out into the streets around what's happening with the climate. You know, you think about what's happening even now with this COVID-19 pandemic and what that actually means, and the fact that, look, we're standing in a moment in history where not only are things so sharp, but where there actually is a strategy and where there actually is leadership and where there are people who are putting their lives to organizing for revolution and getting to a different society. And that's why we're here. You know, that's why we're here in LA. And even like we were talking about the tour earlier and mentioning it, the Revolution Tour, the National Revolution Tour, and speaking to like, look, there's people, like real people who are here in LA who are concentrating forces fighting to actually get more people to join this team, basically, to join this team of people who are actually going to become scientists, who are scientists in the realm of revolution, looking at how we can change the world. And that's what BA is actually leading. And that's what we're calling on many of you, all of you who want to see a different world, really, to be a part of. And I just think it's like really needed, even kind of soberly confronting, like, you know, what kind of future do we want to fight for and what kind of world do we want to live in? And that's kind of the question of the day. And I think that it's like, even in like hearing how time in and time again, like when people actually lift up their heads, everything gets funneled back into how is it that this system can just continue to go on. And you hear it even today, like the situation that we're in right now, and there's such a fight for people to just go into themselves or be like thinking about only them or thinking about only Americans. Like, no, like we need to be thinking about all the people of the world and how is it that we can get to something different. Like it's a crime, you know, it really is a crime that so many people who have a lot of potential are even locked out of lifting their heads for a second. And you know, I just think that this is a real challenge that all of us, like us here, and then even you know, have to actually put on the map. Like, this is what we're talking about, and we really have to fight to get people out of just such an enclosed way of thinking. And, you know, it's very, different that not only is it that, you know, we have this here, but we're also standing like in a moment where we can actually make big changes and big leaps, like in a very crucial time. And I just kind of want to, you know, extend a welcoming arm, you know, a welcoming hand to people who are stepping in now and who are seeing this and who do actually want to become a part of this movement. And there's a lot of work that we all have, you know, to actually go forward in changing this if we're going to get to a different world. Next, we want to show you all an interview with an immigrants' rights activist named Jorge Torres, who's in New Jersey, and we filmed this earlier this week.
This global coronavirus pandemic, I'm really happy to invite onto the RNL show Jorge Torres, who is an organizer with the National Day Labor Organizing Network in New Jersey. Jorge, welcome to the RNL show.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for the invitation.
I wonder if first you could just tell us a little bit about what the work you do has been overall in recent years, and then we'll talk a little bit about how this corona pandemic is impacting the immigrant communities that you work with.
I mean, I've been involved more than 10 years with the immigrants' rights movement. I was undocumented. I came to this country when I was 16. I'm 35 now. And I was, me, my dad, and my little brother, we came. And we overstayed our visas and we become undocumented. And then since then, right after I graduated from high school, I couldn't go to college, and, you know, scared of being stopped by the police all the time, scared of being my mom and my dad not coming back home because they couldn't be stopped by the police or not having a driver's license in Connecticut. And suffering from the first hand what is the what is to live undocumented in this country.
The COVID virus, how is that impacting the immigrant communities that you're part of, that you work with?
COVID-19, we in the National Day Labor Organizing Network, we work with a lot of worker centers, around 56 members organizations who have worker centers or in corners. Day labor is a worker that goes every day out in the corner or in a worker center to ask for work. And they are the more vulnerable this time. The Senate just passed and a relief to people that is documented in this country, and they isolate totally and put them in the garbage. People that is undocumented and people that doesn't have papers. So this affects economically, psychologically too, because it's not just about you. I mean, people, day laborers and workers in general, and community members are just stressed about what could happen with it. And the only way to find or to get some food on your table is to go and look for work in the corner. And then right now you can even do that.
I also understand that you've been involved in organizing and leading protests at the detention centers in New Jersey.
After this pandemic, we were pushed to be a little bit more, I would say, change our strategies and try to see what is that we can do to support people that is in detention centers. And just because everything is closed in New Jersey and New York, and we are protecting business and we are protecting our people, of course, but the people that was left out was the people that it is in detention centers. They were telling us, we had here, that they were doing their own mask. They were using soap just to try to disinfect themselves. It was nothing that it was provide to them to protect them and to try to prevent for them to get infected just like any human being that is in this country. So what we did was, with the campaign Ice Free New Jersey and also some groups of New York, we organize ourselves. We also bring some other campaigns that are around, like Never Again, Cosecha as well, and like a lot of our allies. And we organize some car rallies, honk protests outside of the detention centers. People that were detained in the border were transferring, or people that was detained in New York were transferring to New Jersey. And as you know, New York is the new, epicenter of this COVID-19. So they were put in the detention center without totally discretion, without totally protection, and the inmates were very, very worried about it. So they start a hunger strike in a way to protest, and they were not being protected by anyone. So it starts in Essex County Detention Center. And then we did another action in Hudson and in Bergen. And the curious thing was that the inmates were getting, this campaign of hunger strike by themselves. And the 4 detention centers are now in hunger strikes. And we are asking the Governor Murphy to close this, to release them. He released 1,000 from the criminal justice side of it. They were high risk or getting sick. So we are pushing to see if he can do something with the immigrants' rights.
So there are 4 detention centers that have detainees who are on hunger strike right now. Do you have a sense of, from what part of the world are they? Why are they detained? For people who don't know and who are told, look, these are criminals, they're invading our country, all this racist garbage. Who are these people, and what is at stake with why they would go on hunger strike?
Yeah, they detain there because one, because we have a racist policies that it doesn't allow us sometimes to get a driver's license. It doesn't allow us to go to work with our own social security number. There is people that is being detained with minor violations, like, tail light down, or, well, or your headlight broke and then I have to detain you, or I don't know. Most of them is driving without a driver's license, because we don't have a driver's license in New York and in New Jersey, I'm sorry. And so yeah, I mean, is and then from where, I will say that a lot of people from South America, a lot of people from Haiti. I used to work at the Ecuadorian consulate, and we used to see in the Elizabeth Detention Center a lot of people from Central America, but also what was curious about it was a lot of Vietnamese. It was a lot of Vietnamese there too. So yeah, it's all over, but it is just people that's just trying to save their lives here and to make a living.
So I had just one more question for you, which is, if there's anything you want to add. You began with your own, it was a very personal sharing that you did about your own coming here and becoming undocumented with your family and the fear that carries. So much of that experience is silenced of necessity because there's risk involved. And a lot of people have no idea what it's like to live every day undocumented or in a mixed family, and how this impacts in general and how it impacts with this virus. If there's anything else you want to add that we missed in the conversation.
Sometimes we talk about migration, then artists talk about migration as something beautiful, as something nice. But we experience that is hard and painful. When you cross the border, when you got to walk a lot, when you overstay, like I did with my family, when you live in every day, or seeing a cap around and being scared of actually just getting pulled over because of the way you look, of the color of your skin. It's painful, and living in a country where is sometimes where you feel like you're not well welcoming, that they see you as an alien, as the illegal person. I think we more than that. I think United States and the community in general, we gotta go beyond that. I think this crisis of the COVID-19 is teaching us that it's not just affecting a gender. It is not just affecting a color of a skin. It is affecting to everyone. And I feel like we need to get connected as a human being. I mean, we got to think beyond that, beyond your gender, beyond the color of your skin, beyond of your religion. So my message to everyone is, let's be humans. Let's touch ourselves. Let's take a moment in this crisis that we're living right now, to talk to each other, to learn from each other, and also to be a little bit more humans, and to connect with our hearts instead of our political views or religions or genders. That will be my last thing to say. I'm really thankful for this kind of shows to keep being alive. I think we need to support. I think mass media is not telling what we need to hear. And I think having people and having shows that are actually giving us a space for us to express ourselves without telling us what to say, without putting boundaries. This is what we need. We need shows like this to tell us and to give us spaces to community of color that we represent the minority of this country. and that we can make changes. So I'm really, really thankful for your time and for your, for this space as well. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Jorge. And I just want to, I feel very mutual. And I want to everybody watching, I want to highlight as well the fact that even in these conditions of COVID, where people do need to practice social distancing, people need to take care, we should be wearing masks, and all of these protections, which we've been covering on this program as well. It's so important that Jorge and others have organized protest in a safe way that does not leave behind others who are behind closed doors and who those who rule over us would just as soon have us forget about and be erased and let them die off. And I think it's very important. The car caravans, the honking of the horns, people need to find more ways to stand up for those in detention and to stand up against the other crimes. And so I just want to really commend your determination and creativity on that, and that others need to take that as an example. So thanks for being with us.
Look, there's so much that people don't know. I mean, everybody is facing this pandemic. It's hitting everybody's lives, but it's really important for people to zoom in on and examine. And that's why we wanted to share this with people. What's being done to those who already were living in the shadows, for those who are already discounted and invisibilized by the way this system works and trains people to think. So, there's obviously more that we could have gotten into, more that we'll get into in the episodes coming up, but I'm really glad we got to share this with everybody here.
Yeah, we're going to continue to get into the question of, into the whole situation with the immigrants and refugees. It's at the centerpiece of the program, the fascist program of the Trump-Pence regime, with concentration camps on the border. But in the context of this pandemic, it could possibly be something that approaches genocidal proportions, especially because you've got this back and forth with the border too. And here's another lesson. You've got a leftist as president in Mexico who's busy holding up amulets and saying this will protect us from the coronavirus. And now, you're deporting people, locking the borders, people have gone back and forth. We're standing potentially on the precipice of what could be, not necessarily will be, but could be a tremendous crisis. And a big part of the new communism, a tremendous breakthrough of Avakian's, is internationalism. Not just that we appreciate the people of the world, but we understand, and he's given the material basis for why it is that the world is so closely knit together, and that in order to fundamentally get free and overcome all forms of oppression, the whole world has to get free. Okay, so we want to conclude the second episode of the Revolution Nothing Less RNL show with a special treat. In the early 2000s, Bob Avakian made a film, Revolution, Why It's Necessary, Why It's Possible, and what it's all about. And there's a clip in that film, actually we're going to show you two clips put together, of why do people come here from all over the world. I think you're really going to enjoy it. Now, some of the references here are from the early 2000s, but they are even more relevant today. After the clip, I'm just going to say a couple words before we close out the second episode of our show.
Now I can just hear these reactionary fools saying, well, Bob, answer this. If this country is so terrible, why do people come here from all over the world? Why are so many people trying to get in, not to get out? Maybe we can imagine someone like Vice President Dick Cheney, that crooked-mouthed monster and worldwide mass murderer. Maybe we can imagine him saying something like this. Yes, Bob, why is that? Why? I'll tell you why. Because you have fucked up the rest of the world even worse than what you have done in this country. You have made it impossible for many people to live in their own countries as part of gaining your riches and power. To understand how this system works and how it controls and shapes people's lives, Let's look at how people from Mexico and black people end up living alongside each other in somewhere like Watts in Los Angeles or New Jersey or New York City today. It's 1780 or 1800, and someone is walking through their home village in Africa. Maybe they're taking care of a few cattle, maybe they're tending a few crops, maybe they're just out for a walk and enjoying the sunny day in the summer. Whatever, all of a sudden they're grabbed and a rope is thrown around them. They're dragged away, never again to see their village or their loved ones. They're transported to a seacoast where they're sold to slave traders, thrown in the hold of a ship under the most horrific and unimaginable conditions, piled together. If you've ever seen drawings, diagrams of slave ships, people packed together, cargo as they were called. Rats crawling over you day and night, slop at most to eat. Never even allowed up on deck to even get any fresh air. If bad conditions arose on the seas, storms developed, the slave ship owners would go among the cargo, the human beings, and decide which one should be thrown overboard so they could save the rest of the cargo so they could make a profit. And through all that horror, you're finally brought to the Americas. Have everything stripped away from you, even your identity. Forced to slave, the people forced to slave away for generations. As the old saying goes, from can't see in the morning till can't see at night. After all the unbelievable horror of what I just described on the slave ship, the Middle Passage, for millions, where millions and perhaps tens of millions died, and those who survived were subjected to these unbelievable conditions of slavery. After generations and centuries of that, finally comes the Civil War. You're promised an end to oppression. You're promised you'll get land and a means for farming the land, 40 acres and a mule. But the promise is broken. After a few years of Reconstruction in which a few people got some rights and a little bit of land and property, people were stripped of all that and subjected to all the kind of terror and lynching that I've talked about here. This goes on also for generations. The KKK and the rest of it, forcing you to remain on the plantations, terrorizing you into working for the man, being cheated even when you do work. Finally, after World War II, you're driven off the land. You seek a better life. You go to the city or you go to the north. And what do you face? Once again, betrayal. You are segregated once again, terrorized now by the police. You end up in a housing project that's being allowed and deliberately constructed to rot away. In ancient Mexico, in the beginning of the 1500s, the Spanish conquistadores arrive in what they call the New World. The Spanish conquerors destroy the old ways of life and work people to death in the mines and on plantations called haciendas. This old way of life was not free of exploitation and oppression and plunder, but the Spanish did not come to liberate the people or to do away with exploitation, oppression, and plunder. They came to institute their own, an even worse and far more vicious form of exploitation and plunder, literally working people to death in the mines and on the haciendas, destroying their culture, taking away everything from them. About 150 years ago, after Mexico became independent from Spain, the U.S. waged war on Mexico and stole a large part of its territory. One of the main reasons for this is that the slave owners in the southern U.S. needed more land. The U.S. replaced Spain and other European colonial powers as the force dominating and plundering Mexico. The Mexican Revolution in the early part of the 1900s promised land to the peasants, but there was never a fundamental change, and the masses of people were still trapped in a situation of being exploited as poor peasant farmers while their country is plundered by the U.S. Throughout the 20th century, and even more so in recent years, The ever greater domination of farming in Mexico by big American agricultural companies has ruined the livelihood of millions of more peasant farmers in Mexico, who are already living in poor and desperate conditions, but were driven further into such desperate conditions, so much so that they could no longer survive by farming. The Mexican government goes into more and more debt to big banks and financial institutions in the rich countries, especially the U.S. And then, at the insistence of the U.S., it cuts off aid to the peasants who are still trying to survive by farming in Mexico. In effect, the government forces them to grow crops that get sold internationally on what is called the world market, which is controlled by the rich countries and their financial institutions. But the Mexican peasants cannot compete in this world market. They cannot make a living. They can barely survive, if they can survive at all, by farming. Writing in our party's newspaper, The Revolutionary Worker, in 1994, shortly after an uprising in Chiapas, in the southern part of Mexico, Michael Slate gave a sharp example of this. He wrote about what has happened to Mexican agriculture over the past 30 years. Now, agri means having to do with the land, so agriculture is a way of life based on the land. Slate described how over the last 30 years, Mexican agriculture has been greatly damaged by even more deeply mixed in with and dependent on the world market. Peasant farmers growing things not for their own needs and not necessarily for what is needed in Mexico itself, but what can be sold to big buyers all over the world. Once again, a world market dominated by companies controlling billions of dollars. Deeply in debt and under pressure from the World Bank, which itself is dominated by the U.S., the Mexican government promoted crops that could be sold on the world market in order to try to pay off this debt that it was sinking deeper and deeper into. Land and resources were shifted away from basic food production, and the results have been a disaster for the peasants. In Chiapas, for example, most peasants used to grow corn and beans, but over the years, many switched to growing coffee for export. When the price of coffee fell on the world market in 1990, thousands of Mexican peasants were ruined. And in a recent issue of our newspaper, the RW, there's another article detailing more fully how imperialist domination from the U.S. through things like NAFTA and other ways have further ruined the peasants in Mexico. Another thing mentioned in that article is the maquiladoras in Mexico, just inside the border with the U.S. These are factories that are set up by U.S. companies. They move away from the U.S. and put them just over the border in Mexico. And that line there, that border, is the difference between wages that are 10 times higher on the U.S. side and 10 times lower on the Mexico side. And who works in these maquiladoras? People who can no longer live in the interior, in the countryside, on the farmlands of Mexico, and especially many women who are not only brutally exploited, but also sexually harassed on the job, and many have been murdered coming to and from the job in these border areas. But even that's not enough. Now many of the maquiladoras are being closed down on the border, while some new ones are being built further in the interior of Mexico in order to take advantage of people who are impoverished there. And still others are being moved to other places, in Asia and elsewhere, where people can be worked for even lower wages because they're even more desperate. So through all this, you find yourself having to leave your home and your homeland in Mexico to go to El Norte, the USA, where you face discrimination and exploitation, living in fear every day of the immigration police, La Migra, if you don't have the necessary papers. You too end up in Watts, or in New York City or New Jersey or other cities in the U.S. In the early 80s, there was a movie starring Jack Nicholson and Elpidia Carrillo called The Border, which dramatically showed the kinds of hardships that drive people and the promises and illusions that call them to cross the border from Mexico into the U.S. And it showed the hardships they suffer once they come to the U.S., the ways in which they are treated as aliens, and how they are exploited and brutalized in so many ways. The following lines from the theme song of that movie give a powerful sense of what this means. The bitter disappointment that is found in the so-called promised land of the USA, and the many ways in which people are still hemmed in by the visible and invisible borderline. Now, my voice is hoarse, but I'm going to give this a try. There's a land, so I've been told, every street is paved with gold, and it's just across the borderline. And when it's time to take your turn, here's a lesson you must learn. You will lose more than you'll ever hope to find. And when you reach the broken promised land, every dream slips through your hand, and you'll know it's too late to change your mind, 'cause you paid the price to come this far, just to wind up where you are, and you still just across the borderline. For oppressed people who have been through all this, what sense does it make to fight over the crumbs the oppressors leave us? Or to fight for control of things we can never really control under this system, including the very neighborhoods we live in, the neighborhoods they have forced us into while they run these neighborhoods down? What sense does it make to fight each other like that when we are part of the same class of exploited and oppressed people who can rise up together to put an end to all this?
So again, that was Bob Avakian from the Speech Revolution, why it's necessary, why it's possible, and what it's all about. You can find the whole speech at revcom.us. It's from the section, Why Do People Come Here from All Over the World? So that's going to conclude our second episode. I want to thank you for tuning in and see if you want to add anything before we sign off.
Yeah, I want to thank people for sending in the comments. They've been really helpful in seeing some of what people thought about the show, and I want to remind people, make sure that you subscribe and hit the notification bell, because each week we're going to be uploading every Thursday. And remember, you can become a Patreon. We got 7 Patreons so far.
13 Patreons
13?
so far.
Oh wow,
13.
Okay. Well, we want to give a shout out to you all, and thank you for supporting the RNL show. And you can become a Patreon today at, our handle is patreon.com/therevcoms, and thank you for watching.
What is the email that people can write us?
You can write us at therevcoms@gmail. If you have a comment, a question, an idea, suggestion, you want to volunteer to be part of the show in some capacity, you can comment below, or you can write us at therevcoms@gmail.com.
Since we recorded the second episode of the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show, the scale and scope of what lies ahead has, at least for the moment, gotten through the thick anti-science fascist head of Trump. And now even his criminally negligent regime has sounded the alarm that 100,000 or perhaps 240,000 people will die in this country, with the first major spike in deaths unfolding now, and with the peak to come in the next 3 or 4 weeks. I began this show speaking of the pre-existing conditions of this system and the fascist regime that now rules it. The magnitude of both of these conditions, a system of ruthless competition to maximize the exploitation of people and the planet in pursuit of its god of profit, with the interests of humanity be damned, and that it is currently ruled by a fascist regime, a white supremacist anti-science regime that has led us at the RNL show to send me out here to this deserted parking lot in the suburbs of Los Angeles to issue this closing statement for episode number 2 of the Revolution Nothing Less show. This is a moment when the reality of this system stands naked before the world. The killing myth of this as the greatest country in the world and as a beacon for humanity stands absurd in the face of what it is bringing down on the people of this country and the world. Much will be demanded of those who seek to serve the people. Doctors, nurses, EMT workers, all those who are on the front lines of providing the care for the sick and risking their lives and their well-being to meet this need. We at the RNL show and the Movement for an Actual Revolution and all who yearn for a better world must in this time do no less to bring the truth and the cure to the masses of people here and around the world that there is another way the world could be through revolution, as we have brought to life in this, the second episode of our show. The reality is stark. 100,000 to 240,000 potentially dead. Millions in India and Nigeria, where masses face starvation in the face of this disease, undermining their immune systems. In New York City, there are tent hospitals set up in the middle of Central Park. Prisoners at the Rikers jail in New York City are being offered $6 an hour and personal protective equipment to dig mass graves. Federal prisoners have to buy their own soap at a moment like this. Water is shut off for 100,000 people in Detroit. How are they supposed to wash their hands as the first order of good hygiene and measure to prevent this disease from spreading? With almost half of America living but 1 or 2 paychecks away from poverty, and now with almost a third of the country filing for unemployment, what will happen? All at the same time that homeless are being herded into parking lots to bed down in the shadow of the casinos of Las Vegas. And we have spoken already in this episode to the catastrophe on top of a catastrophe of this virus rampaging through the immigrant communities, through the ICE detention centers, and through the concentration camps on the border. And all of this horror is only part of the story. What must emerge over the coming weeks and months is increasing resistance and a movement for an actual revolution. Already, there have been car caravans around the corner to demand the release of detainees, hunger strikes in at least 5 detention centers around the country, and Refuse Fascism took to the streets in Times Square, New York City, in a safe distance, safely massed protest to demand the Trump-Pence regime be gone. In Brazil, opposition politicians have called for the resignation of the fascist Bolsonaro, who's jeopardized the whole population around COVID, and people go out every night to their windows and bang pots and pans and do chants. Can we do no less? In fact, we must do more. And as we saw earlier on this show, the RevComs are releasing communiques that are bringing science to the people, calling on people to spread the revolution in the leadership of Bob Avakian and become part of the great struggle to emancipate humanity. And on revcom.us, there are letters from prisoners who are responding to this moment. I want to read an excerpt from one of these letters, and we're going to be getting into more of these as the weeks go on. Remember, these are from those who are locked into what will be the hellish incubators of this COVID virus. But at the same time, these can be incubators for a moral and determined force for revolution, for a radically new world. I read an excerpt from one of these letters. This virus has knocked America off its high horse, for the lack of a better term, as it has exposed the underlying workings of this system, a system which operates through racism, oppression, and corruption. I continue. This nation has been exposed, and the time is right for us to declare our revolution against these corrupt leaders. In order for us to achieve our true liberation from this corrupt system, we need an actual revolution, which overthrows this system and replaces it with a radically new and far better one that will allow us to live in a society in which production is actually organized to meet the needs of all the peoples, black, brown, yellow, red, and white. This revolution needs to happen now while the beast is tormented with the confusion and the destruction of COVID-19. We are heading for turbulent times, and either way it goes, doing something or not, we are still heading that way, so to speak, because it is the system that dictates that way. That's but one excerpt from these letters. So with the words of these prisoner, I will wrap the second episode of the Revolution Nothing Less show, echoing my co-hosts to call and spread this show far and wide. And more, to everyone, confront what is upon us, cast away illusions, and prepare for a serious crisis that must be met with a scientific approach to nature and to society, with a morality that has the interests of all humanity put first, and a determined struggle that raises the understanding, determination, and organized strength to prepare for the time when the system can be overthrown and the system brought down and a far better world brought into being.